Hello, YouTube. This is the Galley La Podcast, and today we're going to be reviewing One Piece Chapter 1033. So, Gboss, what are your thoughts on, let's say, the initial struggle between Zoro and Enma? Do you think it was well written? Did you think it helped develop his character and bring something we haven't seen him in a while? So, what were your general thoughts on that?
Um, with the initial thing before Sanji and Queen's talk.
Yeah. So I'd say the initial, we're starting to see that struggle, that conflict develop with Zoro, basically, with King. Yeah. And, him getting a direct hit on King also seems not to be doing too much in terms of damage.
Yeah, I'm more focused on King's durability at this point because Zoro just straight up stabs him, but then he has like some sort of, what is it, like a counterattack with explosion?
Yeah.
Like we'd never seen King do something like that before, but even like with fighting Marco. And I think this is the first time we ever just seen Zoro just kind of straight up try and stab someone with the sword.
Yeah, and it didn't really do too much. And I kind of think, one, is good to see Zoro the struggle. Two, I think this is kind of where an interesting connection, because you see the explosion thing, and then it goes to the Sanji panel. This was kind of the point I kind of wanted to bring up to you, where Queen gives the description of he's a surviving Lunarian, and they were seen to be as gods, but they were all supposed to be eradicated, and everybody assumes that's the world government. Now, what's kind of interesting, 10 chapters ago, in chapter 1023, Izo was carrying Marco, kind of rescuing him, and then Marco asked Izo, hey, Izo, do you believe in God? And then Izo was like, are you drunk or something? So what I kind of find interesting is we had that potential link of Sanji maybe being a Lunarian, because Queen brought that up, and the King had an interesting facial reaction to that because of Sanji combusting on fire. So we see that huge combustion attack. You're right, it's the first time we've seen it, and then we cut to Sanji. Now, what's also interesting, though, is the gods aspect. That's the first time the Lunarians have been described as a god. And we've also assumed the Lunarians are winged creatures that fly high. So, when you go to Jaya, that's when you get Sanji's first entrance of, let's say, that he's from the North Blue. Kind of like that was the first hint of his Vinsmoke identity. And so and then also Jaya is obviously linked to Skypiea, and Skypiea is the first time we see the title or reference of gods, basically. So I think in a way that's kind of a way you could look back at it, where Sanji's identity is connected to some type of winged creatures. And I kind of want to bring it to Sanji gets this insane durability, the same arc where we're introduced to King, who also has insane durability in fire. So I kind of think one aspect of this is maybe the strong skin is part of the Germatech that comes from that is basically Lunarian DNA. So all the Vinsmokes have the Lunarian DNA, which gives them the insane durability that King is showcasing right now. And maybe Sanji got the specific aspect of him blowing up in the flames, basically. So that's kind of my theory. I don't know what you think about that, but I just noticed there were some interesting thematic connections between how Lunarians are identified and how Sanji was introduced in the story with his foreshadowing identification.
Yeah, I hadn't heard or thought about that before, but those are definitely interesting points. But I think before we kind of theorized about Sanji's DNA being linked to the Lunarians, but in talking about the gods, aren't the celestial dragons considered like gods as well? Do you think they have some sort of connection with the Lunarians, or am I misremembering something?
So they are too, and then obviously the only other time we see that is God Eneru, right? Because it's like a title in Skypiea.
And God Valley.
God Valley, right? So those are kind of, and maybe God Valley is more of a reference to the Celestials. So the reason why I think it's more Skypians is because they're both winged, basically. They both seem to be like an otherworldly type of creature, essentially. And I think it kind of, like I said, it goes back, links more cleanly with Jai and all that. Another thought I had maybe is that, and I think we discussed this previously, the Vinsmokes may have had contact with Lunarians way back when, because they're one of the few people that can actually physically get on top of the red line with the snail slugs, basically.
Yeah.
And also they were a part of the world government too.
Mm-hmm.
So there is kind of that, maybe they had an interaction, maybe they helped fight to wipe out the Lunarians. Because it is interesting where Sanji says, how could beings like that get wiped out? And then Queen says, that's something you'll have to find out for yourself. Mm-hmm. So one, that could just kind of be a throwaway line for Queen, or there's like a double meaning where part of Sanji's lineage with the world government, with the Vinsmokes, Lunarians, whatever, is part of the key of finding out the lore of what happened to the Lunarians, basically. And we know the Vinsmokes were vicious conquerors, so maybe potentially they wiped them out back then, and that's how Sanji got his DNA. So those are kind of some ways to look at it with the whole God's Valley thing too, also.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe God's Valley doesn't necessarily tie into that, but I was thinking maybe it was called God's Valley. Maybe that's where. So the Celestials were involved in that incident, and their slaves. So, and we don't necessarily know when the Lunarians were wiped out. So maybe the Lunarians were wiped out at God's Valley. Maybe I'm just completely off the top of my head right now.
That's possible. I assume so. King's like what, 40s, 50s. So maybe he was a little kid, kind of like the last one, and his whole tribe got wiped out. Essentially, there's definitely like an aspect of it there. I think when you get to this idea of gods, I mainly think of Skypiea and all that, just because that's the first time we're introduced to something like that. And we know there's various tribes too up there, so maybe at one point they came down too. So there's definitely a lot of aspects to this. And I mean, so do you think Sanji's Lunarian?
I think so, especially this is going a little bit farther into the chapter, but there's the panel where King is like mocking mocking Zoro for risking his life to make sure his sword doesn't fall off of Onigashima, and like right there it shows King's entire leg engulfed in flame, like Diablo Jamba. So I think that's pretty clear that that Sanji must have some link to the Lunarians.
So for sure, and all those other clues I presented too. And what I kind of find interesting with both of them, they started the fight together and they're still in contact as their fights go on. So they might together, separated, and then they come back together as the wings to defeat their opponents in close proximity. And I just kind of think it would be weird. Maybe the way that Sanji finds out about the Lunarians, as Queen alluded to, is Sanji having closer contact or recognizing something with King, whether it's showing the identity. And I just kind of think it would be strange if they had two people of the same species who don't have any further contact with each other beyond this point. So, I mean, that's something I'm hoping for too, is kind of having a back-to-back fight with it. And Zoro said I need to know what this thing is for me to defeat it. So, I don't know. Yeah, it will be kind of interesting to see how this goes on, though. But Zoro and Sanji's fights are very similar, too. Where Zoro's fighting off his power-up in Enma in a different way how Sanji was fighting up his power-up with the raid suit. And they're conquering their different power-ups in different ways. Basically, where Zoro sees it as an ally, he needs to gain respect, while Sanji sees his as an enemy that he needs to destroy, basically.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. I don't have much to add to that.
Yeah. So, and I mean, we see this theme fleshed out more, right? It's where the sword chooses you, and he goes back to that first sword merchant where we had him back in. Let's see, Logtown,
Yeah.
right? So, and which is cool. I mean, honestly, the thing I liked about Zoro the most out of his whole swordsman thing was him looking at new swords and looking through all the different tiers. I thought that was the coolest part of Zoro's character. Because you're creating a whole lore around his profession, and I kind of felt like Oda dropped the ball, and he never really went back to that ever again, basically, until now. Because we never really, with the exception of like the Supreme grade swords, we never really found out about any new swords or any new swordsmen. And I think I talked about this before. I really wish Oda incorporated the lore of all the new swords. Like Pika having, a lesser grade sword, or Kaku. There were so many moments where he could have introduced an actual swordsman, or at least somebody who uses swords with a specific name sword. And I kind of felt like Oda dropped the ball on that with Zoro. There wasn't much lore. He just kind of turned into a one-dimensional character that's really strong and badass. But this time, this chapter is actually refreshing because it shows him more of his character and him having growth and struggle.
Yeah, and this is what I've been waiting for the whole post-time skip for Zoro. This is definitely his best showing. Because, to be honest, I really didn't care about Zoro for most of the time skip because he didn't really have any struggle, like, physically or morally with anything. Like, he was just kind of there to be a badass, more so. Like, he in Fishman, he like took out Hody, but Hody's like fodder tier, so he takes out the octopus guy, no problem. Punk Hazard, he decapitates a dragon in one hit. But speaking of that, I think he used that same move on King that decapitated the dragon, and King was completely unfazed by it. So that's another point in King's favor for his durability feats, because he's tanking these hits better than Kaido. I know we said that last chapter, but and then in Dressrosa, he basically one-shot Pika. Yeah, he cut Pika's stone body and then basically one-shot him with 3,000 worlds. And then he had his best fight against Carrot in Zoe, where he couldn't even touch her.
That's true. Carrot basically mid-depth him in that clash. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've been seeing more of him shine in Zoe, because he definitely has connections. Wano is he definitely has more connections with Wano. But yeah, it's definitely refreshing to see him be like this, because I think his best fights were when he was dealing with something like with Hachi in Arlong Park.
I loved his fight with Kaku. That was like one of my favorite fights with him.
Yeah, but I think, and he was handicapped in that with his with being chained to Usopp. A lot of his fights he's been handicapped in. But the one he didn't was with Kuma, and that was really good. But I'm going on a tangent. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely liked how throughout this chapter we see how he came into the possession of each of his swords, and it's a nice little history of all that.
Yeah, I greatly, so much more appreciate this chapter, and it makes me like Zoro post time skip a lot more, because I really didn't like his fight with Kaido, because it's like, here's a strong sword, just cause, for whatever reason, he already just gave it. And it didn't explain this idea of fate or a sword choosing someone at all, right? And then he just does these kind of broken moves against Kaido, and then that's it. And then here's a pill, and now you're at full health. But this fight, it's actually developing his character and is making his will stronger, like the King's will he describes as King says it when he uses King's Hockey. You have kingly ambitions. It feels a lot more he has kingly ambitions by him going through his flashback here than him doing broken moves against Kaido.
Yeah.
Like it kind of felt like a cheat code with Roof Piece. And here it actually feels like he's growing as a character, growing as a swordsman, So I appreciate this chapter so much more.
So, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but what do you think of... People have been debating ever since Zoro got Enma about whether it's Odin's Haki or Zoro's Haki in Enma. Based on this chapter, it seems to be more of Zoro's Haki, at least to me from reading this, because
I think you can make the argument. Oh, sorry, go.
Oh, I was gonna say because he was trying to match it up to Odin's level of output for Enma. Like, Enma expected the amount of Haki that Odin was outputting. He wanted Zoro to output that as well, and that's what the end of the chapter showed. And we'll get into what I think about the end of the chapter, but yeah, what do you think about that?
I think it's becoming more Zoro's now. I think looking back on Rift Piece, it was more Odin, and that might piss off some people. But Kaido's reaction was more focused on the sword, not really Zoro. And there's all these memes where it's like it's Enma.
Yeah, he could sense that it was Odin's sword, so he sensed Odin in Enma.
Exactly. So it wasn't really Zoro per se as much, but here it's becoming more Zoro. It's kind of like more of a transformation going on. And maybe you can make the argument Enma was more effective against Kaido than against King because there was a personal history. And since there is no history with King and Enma, there's not as much chemistry, I guess, with fighting this character and everything. So
yeah,
that's kind of how I look at it. Yeah.
Because in this chapter, it specifically describes that each blade has its own unique personality type. So it could quote unquote remember Odin's fight with Kaido, and that memory was imprinted onto the sword, and that's why it was more effective against Kaido.
Yeah, and so when they introduce the village geezer here, it's really just kind of interesting because they get to expand more on the lore and how swords work, and it's like, shit, man. I mean, we haven't really gotten an explanation on how swords work in One Piece since Logtown, and I guess Mihawk briefly touched on it too with the Black Blade stuff. But that's it, and this is something I think the swordsman class has been really underwritten, so I'm really appreciative of this, where it brings more lore behind it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this part too, and it was cool to just kind of see Zoro young training again, give some more characterization, more of a callback, more of a link to his roots and why we loved him so much in the first place.
Yeah. It's also interesting that the geezer who's I think it's Shimotsuki Kozuburo, who created Enma. He says that there's no curses on the swords. Like, the swords have to kind of acknowledge their wielder now. And we've always kind of theorized that, or at least I've kind of read into it. But it's nice to kind of have a explanation now. Like, the people who tried to use the Kitetsu swords were all just too weak to use them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're just like, get out of here, I don't like you. So, in fairness to Zoro, I used the cheat code thing. Enma finds him worthy enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
To use him even on the root piece. But so I do like how the swords, it's more like a process of acceptance, you know? It's not more just like, oh, here's the sword, you know? Just kind of something cheap, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I like this. This is a lot more, it brings a lot more weight to Zoro's character, and I really enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, and I think that trope has been used in other fiction and anime where the sword has to choose its wielder, but I think it works. It works well here, and I think this is the first time we've seen where Zoro got his initial first two swords that were broken by Mihawk. They were from Kozaburo.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that we were briefly talking about this before, but I kind of wish his character was introduced a little earlier in the story, just because it's been so long since Zoro's gotten any form of characterization, you know, that I kind of wish we were kind of sprinkled this in a little bit as time's gone on, you know, because it's been forever that he's had any form of his past playing a role on who he is, you know, and it's just been more focused on the badass stuff and not really the character stuff with him. So yeah, I just kind of wish his character was introduced a little earlier. I know it's a little bit of a nitpick, but I thought that kind of would have been more stable progression, you know.
Yeah, and I find it interesting in I think it's volume 92. Oda was asked to draw what the all of Zoro's swords looked like if they were people, and basically the young version of the Wado looked like this Kozaburo. Like it's a young version of him, and I thought that was an interesting choice that Oda made to just make him basically a carbon copy of the creator. So does that mean that all the swords kind of look like, I mean, it's obviously a gag, but if all the swords look like that, because he drew them for the Kitetsu and the and Shusui, and Shusui looked like a musketeer or something from France, so I don't know how that's supposed to fit in, but
yeah. And no, it's possible that those are their smiths and everything. And well, one point I kind of thought was interesting. I don't want this to get super long, but why would the Navy be after this guy? Like, I can understand why the Beast Pirates would be after him, but why would they be after this guy at all? I kind of thought that was an interesting thing. Maybe it's a mistranslation. Maybe he lived a life of piracy, but it's weird. And kind of interesting that the Navy would be after this old geezer.
Maybe because he was from Wano, and they wanted to know more about Wano.
But why would they? Yeah,
well,
why would they be after him specifically? I guess because the Marines have no knowledge or interactions with Wano really up till recently. Now,
I mean, they've had dealings. Or they've tried to get into Wano. So I'm trying to remember if it was said. I might just be making this up, but I feel like it was said that he, like the village that he founded was, he was a pirate before that. Like that, when you said that, it sparked something, but I might just be making it up. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we'll see it more expanded on later. Maybe something we need to look in more into. I just kind of thought it was an interesting line. But yeah, maybe he's a pirate. Maybe that's about it with that. So,
well, I think there's another connection to a completely different character, because we see the close up of his sword that he's carrying, and it looks very similar. Just the regular square shape. It looks very similar to Shiryu's sword.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I was reading some reactions from people, and that was pointed out in one of the comments, and I looked it up, and they definitely look similar enough. So I don't know if that's going to be something, because I think Shiryu could either fight Sanji or Zoro at this point. Sanji because of the invisibility, and Zoro because of swordsmanship. And I think maybe it would probably make more sense for Zoro because he needs to defeat all the swordsmen. And I don't think anyone else is a swordsman on Blackbeard's crew.
Moria with his scissors, and I think there's a high, probably 85% chance Zoro fights Moria. But it is interesting because I think of the other cursed sword. Yeah, really the only one I can think of that Zoro hasn't been in possession of would probably be the one Shiryu has. Because in Mihawk, is it a cursed sword? Maybe, I guess. It's a black blade, but it's never really been described as cursed. Shiryu's looks a lot more sinister.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I mean, Zoro's fighting a Lunarian, which is related to Sanji. He has fire, which is related to Sanji. Durability, which is related to Sanji, and he might fight Shiryu, has invisibility, which is related to Sanji. So it's interesting. His opponents share a lot of qualities of Sanji.
Yeah, sorry. I was just glancing back through the chapter, and it said, it's like a couple of little kids from the dojo talking, and said, "Did you know the village was founded by pirates?"
Okay.
So, Kozaburo was probably a pirate after he left Wano, and they settled down and made this village.
Okay,
so,
okay.
Yeah, that's why it sounded familiar.
Okay, gotcha. There you go. Awesome. So, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the very end of the chapter with Zoro and his Conqueror's Haki.
Okay.
Because it seems like he's coating his blade in like Luffy and Kaido level Conqueror's Haki, because it has the black lightning. But it also seems to have something else because it has flames on it. I don't know if that's some sort of like other type of Haki or Ashura power or something, but I'm fascinated by what this other type of effect besides the Haki that's going on. I have no idea what it is, but it's shown throughout when it's specifically shown with Enma throughout the chapter. Like it's when he's thinking about Enma and he picks it back up, and now it's coating all his other swords.
So that animation, I think, was used with Pika in the anime. When he fights against him, you kind of see some purple dark flames go over it, and also if you look at the anime for Enma too, it's the same exact style there too. So yeah, that kind of looked familiar. It kind of made me think back with Pika a little bit.
Okay.
So I think that might be it.
I don't think... Sure. Did we have that in the manga? Because I haven't watched Dressrosa anime. So... I don't recall.
So I know 100% it was for Enma in the anime. Mm-hmm. His Haki just kind of looks like flames. And then it was more... Well, it wasn't as pronounced in Dressrosa, but it's definitely a similar art style.
Yeah. And so now it's definitely confirmed that Zoro has conquerors at this point. Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the fight with King's going to be like after this, because we have no break next week, which is amazing. Three straight weeks of One Piece. I don't think we've had that for the entire year. Maybe at the beginning. Awesome. But
so we might see the conclusion of both their fights next week. I think we're kind of at that point with both of them.
I don't know. I think we still have more for Sanji. Like, this is a good point for Zoro to finish his fight, but I still think we have more to see from Sanji. because all we saw was kind of the Hell's memories and him destroying the raid suit. But I kind of want to see him fight more with his Germa identity, because he really hasn't been fighting Queen this whole time. He's just been kind of running away. I think we need to see...
It's a bit of one-sided fight.
Yeah. But I think we need to see more actual clashing between him and Queen before we see the conclusion. But I think Zoro's at the point where we're at the conclusion, almost.
I know we're low on time, but it would be weird if King didn't have an awakening, but Kid and Law did. That just kind of seems weird to me, especially how old he is too.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to see an awakening from Queen as well. And I think it would be a nice challenge. I feel like Sanji definitely needs Queen to do some type of power up in terms of damage, because right now it doesn't really feel like a balanced fight right now, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
So what would... We've seen awakened Zoan users, and they're the jailer beasts of Impel Down. So they just kind of seemed like buffer versions of hybrid forms. So I don't know necessarily if we would see an awakening. But yeah, it's always been kind of weird with theorizing Zoan awakenings.
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to affect everyone else. Like the devil fruits. So I don't necessarily see how awakened Zoan users affect other people besides themselves.
So maybe it can be in a way like, I mean, Otis introduced weird attacks with Queen and King, so those weird attacks just get like dramatically increased in terms of power, you know, with King's weird phase or Queen turning into a full-on snake or anaconda or something. So maybe in that sense, he can play off the whole awakening thing. But yeah, that was just kind of another thought too, to see if we're gonna see awakening final forms, because it doesn't look like King's anywhere close to his peak power yet. So we'll see. But I think that's a good place to stop for now. But thanks everybody for listening. Hope you've been enjoying the content we've been putting out this week. It's been a busy week for One Piece. So hit subscribe and like, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one.
See ya.